All right. Hello, my name is Sam. Today I'm going to be trying to teach you how to do a creative writing piece on Tony Jordan's book 9 Days, which is on the VC text list in list A. So I know that many of you will be doing your creative writing SAC around this time, maybe in the next couple of weeks. And so I'm hoping to run through today, firstly, a little bit of information about what you should expect to have to do, and what kind of things you might want to keep in mind while you're writing. And then I will try to write a creative piece for you guys. Yeah, so a bit of a long one. It's a little bit ambitious, but I guess we'll see how we go. Okay, so let's start now. Firstly, what is the task? So what is the SAC? Your task is to write a creative piece in response to a text. So your teacher will probably assign you a book, and you'll either take inspiration from it, or you might try to fill a gap in the story. It could take different forms, so it might be a script, a diary entry, a monologue, or a passage from the book. If you get a choice, I'd recommend that you try to create a passage in the book or add a different passage to the book so that you can match some of the form and style of the author. Because it's a creative piece, we really want to show as many writing techniques as you can. So I've got a list here: metaphor, simile, personification, zoomorphism, and pathetic fallacy. If you guys are unfamiliar with any of those, you're welcome to comment below, and I'll try to sort of create an explanation, maybe like a short or something to explain it. This is your own story. So although you're using the characters from the original text, you can choose and drive the narrative with whatever you want to. So there's a little bit of fun in it, right? You can build your own story. Okay, so now I'm going to be specific to 9 days. And one thing that Jordan uses throughout 9 days is what we call a stream of consciousness style. So I've got the definition at the top there. A stream of consciousness style is a style of writing where the author aims to structure their sentences in a way to show us the intimate thoughts and feelings of the characters. Now, this is from a different book, but I've got an example from I'm Not Scared. And in this book, there's a young child who has a fight with his parents and he runs away. And what the author really does, that's quite great, is he gives us an insight into how the child is thinking and how the little boy is thinking. He says, "All right," I said to myself, "but when I don't come back, you'll be sorry. And then you'll come under the tree and ask me to come back, but I won't come back. And you'll realize you were wrong. And your son won't come back, and he lives on the hill now." So one thing you'll notice is that it's quite a long sentence, and it's using first person, and it's sort of, what you would imagine. If you put yourself into the situation of a child who's run away from home, is what you'd sort of imagine that you would be thinking, hoping that your parents come back to get you and admit that they're wrong, but maybe that doesn't end up happening. If you're looking for an example from 9 days, this is a really good one on page 2, which is in Kip's chapter. And he talks about, his journey to work and the cold air around him. So as I said, firstly, you might want to try to spot this in your text. Now, this is a definite feature in 9 days, but if you're doing a different book, you might look for long sentences or first person. And using the style, we also want to use long sentences with many clauses, which discuss or present the emotion and the thinking of the characters. And remember that if you do use this in your story, of course, you've got to explain it in your written explanation. So you might write something similar to, "I aim to parallel Jordan's text in similarly employing a stream of consciousness style, which elucidates the intimate feelings of Connie as she struggles with the grief of Jack's death." All right. Okay, so I picked a topic here. Your teacher might give you, any range of topics, but they'll all sort of be hopefully filling some kind of gap in the text. And I've just gone with a very broad one here. I've got a quote from Jack's chapter. Connie says, "Your memory fades, but not the pictures. They're just like real life, except flat and crisp. That's what I like about them. They last forever." And the topic is continue Jordan's exploration of memory in 9 days. So when I saw the topic, I started to think and plan a little bit, think about the theme of memory, where I know that it's introduced in the text and some key moments for it. And so I thought about some gaps that we could fill. So Connie's struggling to remember Jack's face either after he's gone to war or maybe even after the news of his death has come home. We could do one from Francis or Kip's perspective, forgetting Tom or struggling to remember their father. And we know that Francis really struggles with the grief, the loss of his father, so we could really discuss that thing. And then Potentially, we could also look at Jean remembering Tom through Kip. So there's a part in her chapter where she says that as Kip sits at the table, he reminds her of her husband. So we could discuss that in more detail. But what I've actually gone with, my idea, is I'm going to talk about Kip's reflection on his relationship with Connie. So this will be fit in somewhere in Alex's chapter around page 258, 260. So at that point, Kip has received the photo of Connie and he's starting to think of it. And he says, he says to Alex, "Thank you for giving my sister back." I'm going to fill in the gap between when Kip leaves the household with Charlotte and Stancy and when he arrives home in his nursing home. So there's going to be a little gap, the car ride, and that's going to be my physical setting in the car. But as I said, my main sort of dialogue is going to be his internal dialogue, so about what he's thinking and what he's saying. Annabelle will be there too, so we might also introduce her into the story as well. I've put some quotes here as well, so I might draw some of the language out of this. We do want to match some of the language of the text, so Australian slang especially could be useful. But you've given me my sister back, Alec. That's what I was talking about before. The whole time he's talking, he has the photo of Connie in his hands. He never once puts her down, so that sort of symbolizes the really close relationship. And all the things I remember, everything about my life, our family, my childhood, it's all real because Libby knows it too. So you might also be able to talk about some of the other themes from the book. Connie suffers quite a lot because of society's expectations of women. And we might be able to bring that into the story as well. Okay. So I'm just going to bring up a near plain document. So, everyone starts with a blank page. I've put the stuff from the planning here just so that I can remember it. But, of course, you'll be starting with a blank, Word document when you do this. So, yeah, I guess we'll get started. Now, for the start, I might want to reflect firstly on the physical setting. So we know that Kip's just left sort of Charlotte's house. He's in the car going sort of through Richmond, I guess up Burke Street and towards Hawthorne, which is where he lives. So I'll try to describe that physical location and the journey in the car firstly. Okay, so and as far as tense, I'm going to write in present tense and first person as well, so that we can use that stream of consciousness style. All right, I'm going to start off with a long sentence. I hope that I get to see them again soon. I reflect as I step into the driver's seat. All right. So Kip's just left. We know that he has a really strong connection with family, and he has this sort of motto that the lips are what matters after losing Tom. So I feel like starting off with wanting to remember or wanting to see his family again be a good start. Now I've italicized this because it's a thought of Kip's. So this is something that Jordan does throughout her text. Whenever the character has a really strong thought, she'll italicize it. And that just shows that I'm matching the style from the original book, which is what we, of course, want to do. Okay. Annabelle sits beside me and we work our way through the lanes and onto, I guess we'll go with Burke Street. And we are really moving now. So I'm being a little bit free with my grammar and my tense here, because it's the thinking that counts. So and I'm also trying to draw from the text. So from Kip's chapter, he talks a lot about the web of lanes and how he owns them. And so we'll take a little bit of that and it'll show a little bit of specific knowledge of Melbourne and the city with Burke Street. Yeah, he's sort of on the way. Okay, the idea with the car ride is it's meant to be what we call a situational metaphor. So as he's going in the car, it shows a sort of journey or a transition. Here he's moving away from his family. So we might talk about the loss of connection or something like that as well. Okay, in my mind, I can picture Stancy and notices the tears, listening droplets of azure blue show happiness, sadness. So in the house, when where Kip's coming from, he gave Stanzia the coin on the chain, which is a symbol of a family sort of heirloom, I guess, at this point. And Charlotte received some amount of money. And both of them were very overwhelmed and very happy with that. So Kip's going to reflect on that for a little bit. As I'm writing in my mind, I'm trying to pretend to be Kip. So this older guy who cares deeply about his family relationships, taking all of the stuff that I know about him from the book and trying to put that in my mind and hold that so that I can pretend to basically be him as I'm writing. It's been a while since I've seen anyone cry. So maybe this is a trigger for his past experience. I saw too much of it as a child. Too many tears, and too many cakes, which sat perennially on the kitchen bench. They reminded me of what I had lost. Okay, so now I'm stepping back into his memory about Tom's death, and I'm trying to write quite freely here, like his thoughts bouncing around different ideas, right? So it's not necessarily a very logical progression of his thoughts, but I'm just seeing if I can relate some of the experiences he's had. I'm going to try to work through all of the themes, though, remembering that memory is sort of the key word that we're targeting through the question. Too many tears and too many cakes, which sat perennially on the kitchen bench, that reminded me of what I had lost. Okay. Now Francis shared that experience with Kip, so I think in this next sort of passage, I'll talk about Francis. Francis and Kip were twins, very closely related, but they sort of drifted apart and had a ultimate class difference because of Kip's decision to leave school. So I'll probably try to talk about that as well. As I look in the help notice the weather have so they're sort of older at this point, and he's reflecting his life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about his the way he looks, and I'll relate that to Frank in a little bit as well. Each one signifies a year, a day, or even a moment in time, like a photograph that I wear. At first, I mistake my own expression for Frank's. Maybe change the tone here a little bit. We are similar after all. Sometimes I forget we are twins. Just 7 minutes apart, because our lives have taken such distinct shapes. I can see the loneliness he feels on his face. So Frank was deeply affected, as I've mentioned before, by the loss of his father. And potentially we can still see that sort of loss on his face. It certainly affects his entire life, right? It's not something that he, I think, gets over throughout the book. It causes him to sort of blow up his relationship with Annabelle. And at the end of the text, he's alone. So he's got that vulnerability because of the loss. We might want to use a metaphor or simile to talk about that vulnerability. So I'll see what I can come up with, but some kind of, it's something we want to take care of. In his eyes, I can still see the young boy who wished he had someone who could hold him. Someone who was bigger than him, that he had to raise his eyes to see. So one of the things that Francis said is, I realized that there's no one big enough to carry me under one arm. So I'm trying to sort of evoke that kind of imagery here. Francis is still quite bitter at this time as well. So, we can bring in how that's shaped him. Okay, I might leave it there on Francis. We're sort of going to go through a little bit of not so good parts in terms of like, we'll have a negative tone and then we'll come to a more positive tone at the end. I'm thinking the next one, I'm going to talk a little bit about Annabelle and link that to Connie in the next sort of paragraph. So I'll say, Annabelle pierces the silence. Her words barely escaping the hum of the engine as we glide across, or glide through, I guess, the suburban streets. I can't believe that you found that photograph, she says. So this photograph that I'm talking about is the one of Connie and Jack, the one that's on the front cover of the book, and the one that Alex sort of finds and returns to Kip. Of course, they don't realize that they didn't have it at this point. They've left it at Charlotte's house, and later on Alec comes and returns it. Said, there is a sadness in her voice. So I'm going to talk about her own story now. Annabelle used to take care of her father, and he was an alcoholic, and she'd lost her mother as well. There's a sort of emptiness in their household. So she's no stranger to loss, right? And we might be able to relate some of that to this. So there is a sadness in her voice. She doesn't look at me. Instead, stares longingly out the window, and I know she is thinking of the goodbye that she missed. And maybe this is, I think she's far more attached to her father. Her mother died in childbirth, and I think she didn't necessarily, wasn't necessarily that close to her. But her father might be someone that we could talk about Annabelle's loss. That's not really part of the text. So again, we're trying to fill a gap here, something that hasn't really been mentioned in the main book. Okay. And we know that Kip's quite big about goodbyes. He has that philosophy. So if we can bring in a bit of a discussion about that, then that could show that we've really read and understood the text. Okay. She doesn't look at me, instead stares longingly out the window, and knows she's thinking of the goodbye that she missed. Right? We're sort of hinting at her father. I know. She adds, maybe she says something else. She adds photographs, and we might call on one of the quotes from up here. The one about a photograph, that everything is real because you have people that live through it with you. Or without that, without that photograph, I think I would almost forgotten how pretty she was. All right. So we're sort of, again, we're keeping quite a negative tone here, and then we're going to shape it into a more positive ending. But this middle part, we want to really deeply reflect on some of the trauma and the loss that the characters have suffered. She adds, without that photograph, I think I would almost forgotten. Would almost have forgotten. Sorry, have forgotten. I know this dread too. The feeling of trying to picture someone. Remember their eyes and the shape of their face and struggling. When I think of Dad, this is Kip's dad now we're talking about. When I think of Dad, all I can remember is the book, the pages and pages and pages that meant I did not get to say goodbye. Now, Kip didn't get to say goodbye to Connie either. We know that she bled out in the street. So I'm going to shift into that. I didn't get to say goodbye to Connie either. She lay on the ground, Mom said, on a street corner, just like the one I can see through the windshield now. I think about lying there, the hopelessness and overwhelming coldness, I guess, of being alone. So one of the most tragic parts of the book certainly is Connie's death. In fact, I'd probably say it is the most tragic part. And it really is because of the expectations that we place on women, or that society used to and maybe still does, that happened. So we sort of want to, in a I guess a euphemistic way, not directly, but sort of indirectly, maybe point to some of the societal expectations that caused that to happen. We can have a bit of a discussion about it. As a sort of I guess it's a sub point, right? Because memory is the main point, but we might want to bring in this discussion as something you could talk about in your statement of intention as well. So we're going to talk about reputation because that's sort of at the heart of what caused this. Ran inside screaming that day without a care or a worry of what other people would think. She's bleeding. Bleeding. She cried. And I knew what had happened. It was enough to rouse the hustings, for sure. But they were so busy, so I guess preoccupied with their own loss that the Catholics next door were all but meaningless. So Connie and Connie sort of dies pretty much on the same day that they get the news of Jack's death. I don't know, maybe there was a bit of a gap in between when the news was coming to or coming back from Africa to Richmond. But while Connie was bleeding out on the street, I guess they would have been mourning Jack as well, which is a bit of irony. You know, there's a religious divide between the two families, but they do share in this grief together. at a very similar time as well. Okay, so let's just review the paragraph. It's always good to have a read back and see what we're at. I didn't think to say goodbye to Connie either. She lay on the ground, Mum said, on a street corner just like the one I can see through the windshield now. I think about lying there, the hopelessness and the overwhelming coldness of being alone. Mum ran inside screaming that day, without a care or a worry of what other people would think. She's bleeding, she cried, and I knew what had happened. It was enough to rouse the Hostings for sure, but they were so preoccupied with their own loss that the Catholics next door were all but meaningless. I might put a full stop here. Now, if you're writing in general, I probably wouldn't start a sentence with but because we are writing in a creative way and trying to parallel someone's thoughts, sometimes we do start thoughts with but, and so I'm happy to start the sentence with a conjunction. That's fine. Okay. We might leave that there, and then we'll come back to, so we'll probably continue the discussion of Connie for another paragraph, and then we'll sort of wrap it up with a more positive ending. They arrive home and maybe he thinks about where he's going to put the photo in the house. Truth is, the photo, I hadn't forgotten what Connie looked like. Now, on page, I think 94 or 95, they have a very good description of, or Jordan writes a very good description of what Connie looks like. So I'm going to draw on some of that knowledge here. Her chestnut brown hair, her pale cream colored skin, and the little freckles that were peppered all over her nose. The truth is, the picture of her sitting and clutching her stomach, sitting back against, so we're going to bring a symbol in here, the lily pilly tree, sitting back against the lily pilly tree and clutching her stomach. Won't ever leave. When I think of her, I think of her smile, but I'd be lying if I said that her memory wasn't, not her memory, my memory of her wasn't touched by that day, shaped or carved or plagued. I think about how different life is today, and I share a thought, and maybe we bring Annabelle back into the story. I share a thought with Annabelle. How lovely is their family? She knows who I am talking about. The Smother Mothers. So things have changed by the end of the text, and it's no longer the fact that you have to have an abortion if you have a premarital child. Now, Charlotte and Stanzi are really, I guess, symbolic of the fact that these unconventional families, these sort of modern or new families, are more than accepted and embraced. Or that's what Jordan believes anyway. The Smothered Mothers, the filmocracy of Stanzi and Charlotte, not Charlie, Charlotte. And I see the smile spread across her face, and I think she is thinking of Libby, a young girl blessed with two loving parents, and I share in her smile too. So Kip and Annabelle both really had lost a parent, and so to see Libby with two loving sort of caretakers, Charlotte and then Stanzi, who's not her parent, but acts as a parent, I guess, would be really something that would warm them, I guess. As we turn into the gates of our home, now we could probably add a bit more specific detail in here in terms of like where exactly they live. I know Alec is very negative of it. We could potentially discuss like how Kip feels about it, but I think we're going to run a little too far if we go into more detail there. So just do something small like that. As we turn into the gates of our home, I think of where I'm going to put the photo. Where I will somewhere I will see it every day, and Annabelle suggests above the TV. Sorry, suggests as well. Okay. It's a central location, somewhere we spend a lot of time. But the image of my sister above the bright lights of the tally. So on the topic of this word tally, television or TV, tally is an Australian slang word for television. Now, this does make Kip sound a little childish because it's generally a word that younger people use. I don't mind it here, but I'd probably consider the voice that I want to give to Kip. So I don't mind. He's a little bit vulnerable at this point. I'm not trying to really present him as a really stoical or strong character, so I'm happy to use it. And there are advantages to using a word like this in terms of like we show that we're matching the style by using Australian slang. But it's definitely one to think about, and you might consider like where you use them quite carefully. Right? Like a star above the Christmas tree has something a bit inauthentic to it. So we got to think of somewhere where we can put Connie's photo. And from what we know about Connie, probably the best place is going to be in the garden. She, most of the times that she's mentioned in the book and she's in a positive or happy frame of mind, she's in the backyard dancing around the lily-pilly tree, like the sort of image we get in Jack's chapter. So I'm thinking that that could be good. And then I think, and then I think of her in the garden. dancing, swaying gently in the breeze around the lily-pilly tree with the sheets in her arms and a song in her ears. I think of that old tree. Its branches extending out over the house and shielding it from the rain. So the lily-pilly tree as a symbol, I mean, I could talk about it certainly a lot more, but it's symbol of family. It grows throughout the book, just as the Westway family grows. So, and the other comment about it is that it grows in sort of this dark soil. Really, I think the quote is mean soil. It's really hostile for plants. This is all in chapter 3. I think that having the photo connected to that would be a good way to finish the story. You can see that this is much more positive than some of the stuff that we were saying earlier. I think I'll frame the picture. I'll frame the picture. Something sturdy. Something strong and sturdy. An oak, maybe. And I'll leave it outside. So, with the trees, and I'll leave it outside, sitting and looking at the trees in the backyard. That's what she would have wanted to share with Jack. And I hope, in a way, she can. All right. So this image of her in the backyard with Jack, I'm sure that's what she would have wanted, after he came back from Africa. They had that sort of one night together, but a future with him would have been definitely on her mind when she said goodbye. And so leaving her in the, her photo in the backyard's a bit questionable maybe, but I feel like the symbolism of it near the trees, near the nature and outside, that's what Jack loved as well. So I feel like that's a good way to end on. Now, just to go through, we sort of started by describing a little bit about the physical place, with the car and stuff like that. Our story follows a journey. So we get in the car at the start and we arrive home at the end. So there's a sense of finality there. It's like the end of the story. For most of the story, we reflect on the sort of negative parts, the trauma that the characters have suffered. So both Annabelle and Kit. But then from here on, we're starting to think more of the positive elements of their life experience, as we reach a conclusion for the story. So definitely it would be best to always, I think this goes for most creative pieces in general, but concluding in a positive way after exploring some negative themes or some criticism is a really good way to go. And yeah, that's done. So in terms of word count, I can quickly check that. But it should be around, I think most would be around sort of 800 to 1,000 words, somewhere in between there. So we're at 750, which is probably a little on the shy side, but I think that would be fine. And then there's also the statement of intention to do, which is basically just an analysis of your own work where you'll pull out some of the stuff and explain it. So you might pull out the style and explain that stream of consciousness style that we discussed at the start. You might talk about some of the longer sentences and the experience that they're enduring here. Perhaps you're hinting at a religious sectarianism here. And then finally, some of the symbols, so the lily-pilly tree and the photograph, you might discuss how we've sort of called upon that. Make sure that you explain any metaphors or similes that you've used. So I think we used a couple of them. Let's see if I can find one. I think there was one at the start here somewhere. It escapes me. Okay. If you do include a simile or a metaphor, I'm sure there is one here somewhere. One I'm struggling to find now, of course. But if you do, here it is, like a star above the Christmas tree. So that's a simile because we're using the word like. That's something that you definitely want to explain in the statement of intention if you have to write one of those. Okay. Happy to answer any questions. So you're welcome to put anything in the comments, other video ideas. I'm happy to go through and sort of do what I can to help you guys and support you through the year. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Please comment or subscribe. Sort of new to the whole YouTube thing, but any support would be greatly appreciated. So if you have any thoughts or feedback, welcome to add those in the comments below. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.